What's up, guys? It's good to hang out with you guys. I want to welcome in all of our Fathom family and just our extended friends and family who are tuning in online to sit down with us, kind of sit down around the coffee table or the bar top table or whatever, just to sit down for a few minutes. And thank you guys for being here. I want to introduce you to my friends. This is Jamie Boatwright, and this is Lee Trevino. They're both leaders in our church. They've served in different capacities, both in our worship band, on our board at the same time. And now Jamie's still on our board. Lee's really leading our worship department, and so thankful for their leadership in our church and their voice into my life and my family. I'm so grateful for them. But I reached out and just want to have just a really important conversation. Our whole nation's having a conversation right now that really needed to be had. And some really terrible things have happened that have caused that. Not in 2020. There's a lot of terrible things that's happened in 2020. But for years, for centuries, right? And this conversation ain't going to fix that, right? But there's a lot of momentum. And I feel like some protests will die down in certain areas. A lot of things that will take place. But I hope in this time that what we hope to do is just provide an opportunity to listen in on what a healthy, godly conversation looks like, of honesty, of listening and learning and growing, each of us together. And so thank you guys so much for just taking the time. It's in our heart to be, as a church, as Fathom Church, to be a representation of not only heaven, but of our city. And we're not where we want to be. We don't feel like we're the best representation of our city yet, in terms of diversity. But we're growing in that and want to continue to grow in that. And so, there's a lot to process here, right? There's a lot of things to talk about. So we're just coming through this COVID 2020 and race, all the things that have been going on. How have you guys been processing this? Can I start with you, Jamie? Can you get the ball rolling? Like, what emotions can you just share what you've been feeling over these past few months?
For the past few months, I think anxiety definitely has really kicked in big time. Slight anger, depression, you name it, it's pretty much all kicked in all at once.
Yeah.
During these past few months.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not. I think that says a lot for all of us. Like, it's been these spikes
down,
of anger and anxiety and depression. I've heard that so many times from people. Just find that. So thank you for being honest about that. What about you, Lee? Like, what have you been feeling through this season?
Yeah, this season has been the most unsure I've felt as being prepared. I usually can go to my defaults and usually save myself, in a sense, to have some kind of control when I feel like things are spiraling out of control. I've thought after, certain times in my life where I've hit bottoms, where I've felt like despair, that I hit enough bottoms to figure out that how it feels. And with COVID, for instance, because I felt times when I went through life where I had nothing, and I was like, okay, well, at least I've been there before. That something next happened, exposing what's been going on in the world in a whole different way that we don't see in history books. And it was the first time I didn't have answers for something, and that the whole thing that we have been going about right now has been this, I can't breathe. And it's literally, I think everybody can almost, something happened that we all seen. And for the first time, I felt like it took my breath away in a way that how am I going to explain this to my daughter one day on what happened and with injustice. And maybe just as a general thing, it was the first time in my life I started to panic, and I had racing thoughts and my heart raced. And I literally felt like this is the first time I don't have control of something, and watching it happen across globally to people, and the hurt and the pain I felt like almost our earth just was like in pain, and
Yeah.
I never felt that before. The spirit realm felt heavy to me in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That phrase, "I can't breathe," has just resonated in this season. And that's kind of what anxiety, I mean, when people talk about anxiety, the anxiety attack, that panic attack, like you lose breath, so that's a whole layered statement in this season. He mentioned just talking to his kids, he's got one daughter, she's real little, she don't talk much. She's cute as can be, but she doesn't talk a lot. What's that look like for you with your boys in this season?
I think for me, definitely with my oldest, with him being 10, it's something when everything pretty much started, like even with the covert and everything, we just was able to. I was trying to shield them from it because I didn't want them to feel the pressure and the anxiety that I was feeling, and just like worried about what's going to happen to them. Are they going to catch it and all of this? So I was kind of trying to hide it from them. And then when everything else happened with Floyd, it was one of those things where I was like, do I talk to him about this? Because I'm angry right now. And I was like, do I have this conversation with him, or do I just like try and hide it? Like try and hide everything else from him, because I kind of trying to raise him it's almost like a bubble of happiness, where he doesn't see the sadness in the world.
As long as we can keep that innocence,
Yes, as long as I can keep it from him. But then he watches YouTube. He has his YouTubers that he watch and everything. And I don't know what it was, but it was like probably a week after everything happened. And I was like, you know what? I need to tell him. I need to talk to him. So he was sitting downstairs and he was playing on his tablet. And I said, Jay, we need to have a serious talk. I was like, I know this is going to be rough, but we need to have a serious talk. And so I pretty much explained to him what was going on, and I explained to him, the video and all of that. And if he was like, I was like, so how do you feel? And he says, I feel sad and angry. And I was like, well, why do you feel angry? He said, because why would someone do that? Like, why would anybody not care about someone? And so I had to explain that to him. And then, I told him, I said, I understand you feel angry and upset, but just understand that God is love. Just always remember that God is love. And this was not done, this wasn't God. This wasn't godly at all.
Yeah.
I was like, so just remember that. I was like, God is love, and you just continue to love people. And at that moment, I explained to him, we talked about, racism, and we talked about everything, just laid it out all on the table. And he felt like there's been points in school where he's felt discriminated against. And that hurt, because the reason why we moved where we moved was because I wanted to make sure he had the best education, make sure, I could just, raise him the best I could, because I didn't go to the best schools. I didn't have the best upbringings. So my whole purpose in life is just to make sure I better everything for him, for his brother. And so when he said that, I'm like, there's been points where I felt that pain. Like sometimes I felt like his teachers or certain people were saying certain things, and I kind of just like, I don't want to teach him about this now. But after we had that conversation, the very next day, one of his YouTubers mentioned the whole situation the very next day. So I'm like, if I would have just ignored that thought in my mind to just explain it to him, this YouTuber
he's not hearing God is love in the middle of that.
This YouTuber would explain the situation to him, and it could have went a completely different way. And it's like, you don't want to have those conversations, but you have to have those conversations. And even though, especially being in an interracial relationship, me and my husband's white, of course you all know, but Owen doesn't fully understand everything the way I feel.
Yeah, it's different.
Of course, we all know that the child is whatever the seed is. Yeah. So that's the way my grandma always raised us. Hey, remember, the child is what the seed is. But I was like, when he gets in certain situations, they're not going to see this white kid. They're going to see this black kid. Yeah. And that scares me. So I had to have that tough conversation with him that I didn't want to have with him, that my mom and grandparents had with me when I was younger, that instilled in a way that fear. It's instilled that fear, but it also made me see the world in a different light. And I tried to hide that from him, but it's tough, but he knows now.
Yeah. I mean, I think every generation wants that for the next generation.
Yeah.
Wants to be better. Wants to be better. And it feels like, as our nation and our world, kind of walking through hell in a lot of ways. It really does feel like that. And I've said this to many people in my life, in which they're going through the fire and it feels like they're walking through hell. And particularly, I say this the most when I'm talking to people who are breaking generational curses. And I feel like that's some of what's taken place this year. Why it feels like you're walking through a wall, because they walked through that in the 60s, and there's been progress. There's been progress, but there's another wall that's having to be coming through, and it feels like you're walking through hell. And here's what I always just remind people, and I want to speak this to both of you guys in this season. The conversation you have to have with your children, they're worth it. They're worth it. Like, that next generation is worth us enduring this anxiety and anger and figuring all that out, busting through this wall, speaking up, having this. They're so worth it. That next generation is so worth it. You brought up just childhood, and we're talking about experiences in 2020. But I think for a lot of people, I think it's really helpful to be able to hear those stories. I heard a quote a couple of weeks ago that said, there's a difference between transparency and vulnerability. Vulnerability hurts. Transparency doesn't hurt. Because we can guard it and let a little bit out. Yeah, it's sort of honest. But vulnerability kind of hurts. And I know so much of this is just painful to kind of look at. Did you guys just share experiences more like beyond 2020? Like in your life, things you've experienced that you've walked through that lets people out there know, it says, oh, racism isn't real. It's not a thing. And like maybe they've been raised in a bubble, you know what I mean, that their mama, tried to see, or they lived in a town. It was only white people. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they don't see that. Would you guys mind just kind of moving into that zone and just sharing some moments, some things that took place in your life, and just kind of take us into that?
Yeah, I think one thing that Jamie was talking about is, she has Owen and then her, and they're different shades of brown, I call it. But
he's real light brown.
He's
light brown.
and but that's a challenge I think that we find ourselves in, is that and not trying to go off with the experience thing, but please. When your son has both shades, and sometimes he might not be white enough to be in the group, but then he's not black enough to be in the group. So that is one of the things that almost in a way that I can never understand what the boys have to feel, or what anybody out there has to feel. Speaking from the Hispanic point comes from a totally different thing, where I can kind of emphasize that maybe I can relate in a sense to knowing that I'm not, one way, because the one thing I've heard my whole life, and by the way, this doesn't come in any way that I'm a pretty tough person, so things haven't really hurt me in the way of near discrimination to being physically abused. But for the fact of is, like, when I've heard certain things like, oh, well, you're not 100% Mexican. Like my whole time that it's almost somebody saying, oh, you're only half, meaning that, is that my better half or my worst half? Like, if I was full, like, would I be considered not be okay to be at the party or at the birthday parties? Or, that's, I think, where it comes into play in my life, is where, part of growing up, because if I thought I was 100% Mexican, then, and I would be stereotyped to be not American enough or not white enough. And so when it comes to anybody out there, what I would feel like more of anything that I come from is just to start educating myself and educating others, is that this culture that if you are in the car with a white person, you get pulled over, or you're at the party with a white person, you're accepted. Or if you're at vice versa, a quinceañera at a Mexican party, but you're with me, you're cool enough to be with me. You can feel that sometimes, and where the culture and where we're at today, I feel like is at a point where that we should all be equal enough to know that we all bring enough to the party, to the table, to being pulled over, to the stores, and being at that point where we're all okay. So I think mine come more from that part of my life, of when I've heard people say, oh, well, he's not 100% Mexican, and they laugh at it. And I'm like, well, does that make me, and in our culture, that makes you think like, well, am I clean enough? Am I good enough? Am I dirty? Am I not good? And a lot of that happened, growing up without thinking. It didn't hurt me until later on in my life when I was in relationships. And so mine came from more relationships. And one thing I have to credit the Cooper family, and now being married to my wife, is, and you might be able to attest to this in being in relationships, is I was dead scared to meet her father, because literally every relationship before, and it might be just the inner me, but I really do feel like I was judged and not fully accepted into any relationship prior to Hannah's. And that's when I knew it was a God thing. That's when I knew she was, there were so many things that lined up with, relationships being, you hear the term equally yoked. I mean, for us, that has nothing to do with, Owen and Jamie, or Kyle and Taryn, or Lee and Hannah. It has to do with, we are under the blood of Jesus.
Right,
and we are the same, like you said, on Sunday, at the foot of the cross. So educating myself more than anything right now in this posture of where I'm at right now is where I'm basically coming from. But I have to thank my family, and I mean, you probably have seen those barriers broken where you finally feel accepted, because I really was, from the first relationship I was in, when I know I wasn't good enough because it wasn't a family of my race, that stuck with me all the way until, like, for the longest time. And when I met Hannah's and I walked away, and I was just so worried about, I didn't care about how much money I made, what kind of car I drove. Like, I just want to know if they accepted me because I was Hispanic. And did they know I was Hispanic? So that's kind of where it came to play in my life with discrimination.
Yeah.
I mean,
People don't realize, and it's ignorance. It's what it is. And like, we're all ignorant in some way, because we have not experienced everything, right? We could go to another part of the world that none of us have ever been to, and we are ignorant of that culture. Like, when there's like trigger words, and like, to be ignorant. And so, like, understanding that when you say something like that, you're saying something really deep that they don't even realize it. And so I think James 1:19, just being quick to listen in this season, slow to speak, slow to get angry, and just hearing and learning so much in this season. So thank you for taking us down that road a little bit.
Thank you for letting me share that.
Do you got anything you want to speak into, just experiences, things you've experienced, throughout? I know there's a lot of places you could go there. I know there is.
Yeah, the sad part about it is, I do. I have like quite a few stories.
Yeah.
And even when some of me and my friends get together and we talk about it, it's almost like, oh, well, this happened to me. Oh, well, this happened to me. And you kind of try and make light of the situation, but in the inside, you are like truly hurting because you can't believe that somebody would do this or somebody would say that. One experience that the very first time that I really saw it like direct with me was when I first joined the Navy many moons ago. But when I first joined, we were in Pascagoula, Mississippi, which is like in the middle of nowhere. And one of the guys, he wants to go and do karaoke, and he loved karaoke, and he always makes us go to karaoke bars, and everybody got to sing. So we went to this karaoke bar, and I stopped in the parking lot, and this might sound bad, but I stopped in the parking lot. I said, there's a lot of F-150s in this parking lot. I don't think we're going to be welcome at this place right here.
Wow,
I was like, my
yeah.
grandma told me, you see a lot of those in the parking lot, you stay away.
Wow.
And so they said, man, come on, it's like a mixture of us, black, white, Hispanic, everybody. All of us are going. It's our whole division going. So we go in there, and then all of a sudden, we're like looking through the books, me and some of the girls, and then we hear one of the guys that we're with. He said, what did you say to me? And then the guy just said, who let you N-words in here? And then we all turned around, was like, what? And then like a lot of the guys in this bar stood up to us and was like, you guys need to leave.
Wow.
And so I was like, I'm not doing this. And so we left. And then the bar owner, the karaoke bar owner, he's like, that's not what I believe. He's like, I apologize that this happened to you guys. You can stay. I'm going to kick them out. We was like, no, we're not staying. It's okay. We'll leave. And I got on the phone and I called my grandma and I'm like crying. I'm like, I can't believe this happened. And then she's like, did you think racism was dead? She's like, I hate that happened to you in that way, but it's not dead.
Yeah.
And after that moment, like, my grandma would tell us stories when we were growing up about, stuff that happened to her and families and, family members and everything. But it's kind of like one of those things you just hear a story. Mm-hmm. And I think when you think about like the 60s and stuff, with our generation, we didn't live through it. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of like one of those stories that you hear. You know it happened, but it doesn't fully affect you until you see it right there in your face.
Our parents and grandparents were absolutely living through it. Yeah.
So they lived through it. So when you sit there and you think about like, okay, now we're seeing this is our time to go through everything that they went through almost in a way, in our own way. Because I mean, I even think about like 9/11. My kids think that that's something that it's like, what is that? And so I explained to them like what happened during 9/11, where I was at that time, because that really affected me, because I was in like 12th grade when it happened.
Yeah.
But for them, it's the story that I tell. It's not something serious. So when it actually hits you at home and happens to you, you feel it.
Yeah. It's when we walk through seasons like this together as a nation, as a church, as friends, and individually, we're going to be changed. All of us. It's just a matter of how we're going to be changed.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in what ways are we going to be transformed? Are we going to get bitter and suspicious about everybody? Or are we going to really embrace this season? And I think something that's happening on all sides right now is language is being thrown around. Words are fire starters. And even like you said, the F-150 thing, your grandma told you when you saw that. You know what I mean? Like, for someone who's got an F-150, they're like, I'm not a racist. You know what I mean? And so that immediately made me think of like these stereotypes that you guys grew up with.
Yeah.
I was thinking about one. You mentioned the N-word a minute ago. And I was called a wigger as a kid because I hung out with a lot of black people. I listened to hip hop music. I played ball, and they were my friends. And it didn't even hit. It did not even dawn on me. Honestly, at that time, I loved it because I loved the culture and I loved it. I really did. I ate it up. It did not even hit me till 2020. How racist that was. Didn't even hit me. I mean, I think it was because of that, just where I was in that season, and I was young, not understanding it. But man, those stereotypes are huge. You were mentioning some of those. I mean, what are some of those other ones? I mean, you're speaking for a whole population of Hispanic people who are part of this family in our city, friends of ours, that not only you've experienced, but others you've heard.
Yeah, my dad, everybody knows Raul. He comes to the church. He's had a heavy Hispanic accent, and so you can also think of anybody who's not like you, and there's always a different kind of name for them. But it's not a funny thing, but in a sense, you start to make light of these words when you're in a culture. Because you, like Jamie says, you joke around with people who are like you.
Copia.
And the only way you can like defer it sometimes is these names. But the the whole term, the wetback term from us was somebody from Mexico who swam across the water to leave Mexico and come to United States. And, to hear my father, he's in a warehouse with he's not the majority. I worked with him a few summers, and I've heard the names thrown around at him that way. And to see I think when you see your parents walk through it, or you see your kids walk through it, is when you get a little defensive and you get hurt. And there's almost guilt, they say, is something you feel when you've done something wrong, but shame is what you feel when somebody has done you wrong. You feel almost like paralyzed, and so there's definitely terms out there that have been said, and even different cultures that in a way they'll joke around or say stuff about you, even up to being in college and feeling uncomfortable being places because you just wanted to fit in with everybody. But that's just an instance of some stuff that you see, and when I've seen my dad go through it, it hurt me pretty bad.
Well, in the town I grew up in, it's a large migrant community with a lot of farming, strawberry capital of the world. So a strawberry picker, it's mostly, Hispanic,
Right.
Families that have traveled over and are working hard. And so, I definitely saw that. I know there's a lot of ways we could go here. I mean, the stereotypes or any stereotypes that that you've walked through. I mean, there's a laundry list for both of you guys. So this could be a 3-hour, 8-hour conversation.
Yeah.
We're not going to do that, but speak to a couple that have been on your mind that have maybe really bother you.
Well, two that definitely bother me more than anything is if I'm angry about something and I speak my mind or I say how I feel, I'm being an angry black woman because I can't get mad.
Right.
I'm not allowed to get mad. And another one is when I'm at, when I talk, or sometimes it's like, oh, you're talking like white people. Because I was like, okay, so because I use the correct terms when it's supposed to be used, like how am I supposed to talk? And but definitely being an angry black woman. That's one of the biggest ones that really irks my nerves. Because if I get angry at work, or you can see it on some people's face, and especially past jobs and stuff, there's been times when people said it to me directly. Oh, you're just being an angry black woman. Why are you guys always so upset? And it's like,
yeah, you guys,
yes.
right? Or you people, people who use that,
Yeah.
Well, I know there's so many. Like we could literally spend an hour on that alone. And I pray if we're doing anything, we're tapping on a bunch of cans that need to be opened in our minds, in the conversations, and showing what that dialogue needs to look like. You guys mentioned a little bit, and we don't have to go super far into this, but I know this is a thing too. Just last weekend or last Friday was Loving Day. If you guys are familiar with Loving Day, you missed it? Yeah, it was last Friday, right? It's not on the calendars most of the time, but it's, it celebrates interracial marriages, and being legalized in the late 60s, I think it was. Both of you guys are in biracial marriages, or interracial marriages, not biracial marriages. You come up with a different set of challenges, right? On top of that, particularly in society. I know there's challenges in the marriage. We'll save those for another day, right? We've all got those. But talk about maybe some of the things you've come up in society-wise that you've had to break through. In fact, I've heard people try to quote scripture around it, the unequally yoked thing. They've tried to use other ones about not intermarrying and use the Old Testament out of context, right? What are some things personally you guys have walked through on that front?
That's a deep one too.
Yeah.
This one's definitely deeper to think about. I don't know, Jamie, do you have something to say about that? Because
like you said, that would be a long conversation.
Right.
I would say definitely in the last few weeks, it's been really tough for us, like extremely tough. Even though me and him, we really don't talk about it because it's just that tough. And I said, I don't want to talk about it right now. It's me. I don't want to talk about it with him because I felt like he didn't understand. Because when it first happened, and I was trying to talk to him on the phone about it because he's not here. And I was trying to talk to him on the phone. He's like, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And then just like kept talking about something else. And like it was like my whole body just instantly got hot because I'm like, you're not listening. Like,
Yeah.
I just told you what happened, and you're saying that that's crazy, and that's the only answer you're going to give me? And so my best friend, I called her, well, I Facebooked her because she's on deployment, and I was like, you're not going to believe what he said, and this is all he said, and then she's like, well, did you explain how you felt? And she's like, well, what did you want his response to be? I was like, I don't know, but he should have said something, you know.
Us
And,
guys, we can't ever do anything right.
exactly. And I was like, he should have said something. And my best friend is Mexican, and she has like a strong Mexican accent. Oh, very much so. And so she actually called me, and she's like, I'm so sorry, you know. And I think because, like Taryn, she texted me and just, because I was just like silent. Facebook, silent, everything, just to gather my thoughts. And
Yeah.
she's like, I'm just so sorry that you have to, you know, deal with this. This is you know, it's bad. And I just pray for you and your family. And to me, with Owen, he didn't 100% understand how I felt. And his mom, I talked to her about it, but I couldn't talk to him about it because he didn't understand. And it was like because of the fact that he grew up in a middle-class household, he lived in his own little bubble. Our bubbles look completely different. I grew up in poverty. I grew up, you know, in a bad neighborhood. He grew up in a great neighborhood. So he grew up where he can leave his doors open. I couldn't leave my doors open. He grew up where on Thanksgiving everyone gets dressed up. We just wore, you know, T-shirt and shorts or pants, you know, whatever. They have to wear khaki pants and all that. So we grew up in two different households, so it's hard for him to fully understand certain issues that I have, or certain views that I have, because he's never fully dealt
Yeah.
with that until I explained it to him, like, hey, this is why I feel this way.
Yeah.
So sometimes I get real passionate about it.
Yeah.
So I have to stop. I can't talk to you right now. You gotta wait until I calm down,
Yeah.
and then me and you can have this conversation.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is like people of different ethnicities are just going to have different reactions.
Yeah.
Because we're all in separate places, and I think the main goal for us is to, like, even my wife, her reaction when I saw what was happening, automatically, and also my wife and I are 10 years apart, so that's another big curveball. But I remember when it was either 7 or 8 years old, and I was watching the LA riots happen, and watching Rodney King get beat, and I was in Chicago at that time, and I remember getting in the car in Chicago. We were in poverty, but there's so many like different nationalities in there. And I literally remember driving in the car with my dad, and he said, we need to leave the neighborhood because things were getting so bad. We had to follow each other in caravans. I went from one neighborhood watching one minority breaking things. I watched my minority, and it happened again this time,
Yeah.
protecting their neighborhood. I literally drove by a parking lot and watched a cross burning with Klan members.
Wow.
I've never seen such chaos. I didn't know it at that point, but I to this day I remember in my mind a burning cross and a bunch of people in white. I mean, there was so many things happening at once, and that it hit me so hard in that way. And so when I saw this happening, all I could think of is I went straight to fear, and I'm like, what's going to happen? And I started seeing everything happen. I started just panicking, and I just kept praying, God, number one, injustice is happening. Number two, who else is going to get hurt? And I started thinking, like, it was just a panic, like a pure panic. That's why I couldn't, go into further, or why I feel like I couldn't breathe, is like, I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think everybody, even listening right now, I think we all just grew up in so many different ways. We don't know what to do. We have, in my recovery for what I've gone through in my life, They say that expectations are premeditated resentments. I think we all have premeditated resentments, whether we grew up, one way or another, and we are going to resent what people don't understand about us.
Yeah.
I think the main goal for me in the future, like I guess just moving forward, when my wife, she didn't realize like why I was on edge and why I was on panic, because I knew what happened during the riots.
Yeah.
I remember watching In Living Color and watching them joke around, with Jim Carrey on Reginald Denny and Rodney King and all these things, because they had to make light of how terrible it was.
Yeah.
And I grew up in an era, and you too, of just recovery, of trying to laugh about it. But I think we're at a point now where we can't just brush it off like, oh, that's terrible, or that, oh, we can just laugh about it and make comedy sketches about it. I think we're finally at a point where we need to teach ourselves to come into a posture of, I'm open, God, to teach me what you want to teach me. Let me learn and expose what you want me to learn, and help me to lead my family in the right way that's going to make this not be a topic that our kids are going to have to talk about as much. And I don't know, that's just my insight on it whenever I initially saw it, because for me, I felt like that one was a smack in the face, but this one can be a slow bleeder, like a slow bleed out, where it can get even worse if we don't come together and find some kind of common ground.
Make some changes.
The book that I've referred to, a lot of things that I've gone through, because I'm just speaking as like I said, as a person who, I'm sorry, I'm spitting now, who I'm getting passionate, that has no right to really ever say where anybody came from, but just my own story or where I come from. But when Kyle, I believe God did it for a reason. He sent us to the ARC conference a couple years ago, and it's called the Association of Related Churches, and it's a church plant convention. It's just grown, and we see tons of diversity there. Yeah. They had 3 years ago now, I think it's April, was Miles McPherson, and he wrote a book called The Third Option.
Yeah, highly recommend.
And I've been re-listening to it on audio, but it's talking about not making it a we versus them, but finding the common ground where we can all go from this point on. So I think what we're doing with the conversations, my wife's first reaction was kind of like, well, what about my privilege? And we can all say, what about my privilege? But right now, it can be a hot topic. So to the people of the church that I all love dear, to my friends and family, my clients, everybody that we love dear, we can hear that. And I think that's a topic for all of us to just, the ones who understand it, the ones who don't understand it, and the ones who say that I'll never be a part of it. I think it's that search me, O God, and know my heart, and try, test me and know my anxious thoughts. And if there's anything inside me that's not right, lead me in the right way. I think it's fine. It's a point where we can say, and what my wife, where we've had the conversations of, is to say, it's definitely now for, I think, the church. I can't answer for everybody, but for me to just say, God, let me have the posture of who you were when the woman was about to be stoned. Yeah. She wasn't of the right race. She wasn't of the right gender. She wasn't of the right time. That she was sneaked at the well.
She had a history.
She had a history that was really bad. And not to get too much into detail, but the man who was murdered had a history. But that doesn't matter at the foot of who God,
so do I.
Who God has to say. So there's a lot of conversation.
Yeah, there is.
The people know my heart when it comes down to it. But mine is an advocate for humanity, and an advocate to just say, I love you like a brother. I love you as a sister. And how do we take the posture as servants in this? Yeah. And as
that's good.
And as a point to say, like, I love you. And like you were telling your son, like that was, how else do you explain it to him other than, son, you're going to see people do this. Hopefully we don't ever see somebody else go through this. But how do I take a posture as what would Jesus do, in a sense, if that makes any kind of impact?
For sure. And I want to just say to parents, have the conversation with your kids. We haven't had one conversation. We're having conversations every week with our kids. Really, really good conversations. And it's weird. You got to think through how to put it in their age bracket that's right for them. But I think you're establishing that. You're breaking any notes of bias. Because we've all got some kind of bias, that we got to break off. So let's break it off as early as we can where they're not set in 20 years down the road, 30 years down. It's really hard to break bias 40 years down the road.
You know what changed me, and it's something that happened when I was in 12th grade, and I took a psychology class. And the psychologist said something.
She's our resident psychologist. She's got a master's degree and another master's. Yeah.
But,
Just a master's.
but
she's about to work on another one too.
But one of my teacher at the time, he asked everyone, he said, who watches CNN? And then so some of the people in the class raised their hand. He's like, who watches Fox? And some other people raised their hand. He said, I challenge everybody in here to watch the other one. He said, because you can't fully understand one side if you're only watching or on your side. So if you're on your side, how are you going to understand what's going on the other side? And I was like, you know what, that is true. Yeah. And so like when I went to college, I took a couple of theology courses and to learn about world religion. So I learned about all the different religions because it's like, okay, you can't say, oh, this is how this is supposed to be or this is how that's supposed to be if you don't know all the different views. Mm-hmm. So to me, even when it comes with like our relationship, with like the interracial relationship, I can say, oh, they feel that way or he feels that way or this is how it's supposed to be because this is all I know right here. But sometimes you got to step out of that bubble and learn about what's really going on in the world, what's going on in different races, different cultures, different, genders. You got to learn all those different environments to truly get a full picture of, what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to realize that we are all very similar in many ways. We just, the book that I was talking about too says that we're 99.5 genetically the same. And as a hair colorist and a hairstylist, I understand what melanin is and how that affects our hair and how it lightens and how it affects our skin. But, when we all do genetic testing, if we all realize that we are very similar in many ways, and that's why, I use it, we're all different shades of brown and I have color all over me. But we all we are very similar in a way. As a starting point, as common ground, and see each other as just as important is something that I'm really passionate about more than anything. Living that out is kind of part of where I grown up in poverty and seeing a lot too. Has really, I'm glad that God made me who I am to be where I am in a sense, and we all have to take this time as a time to just let God say, you know what, you came from where you came from in school and diversity, you came from where you came from, and we can all come together and find a way to not let the enemy win at the end of the day. This battle
that's so good. That's such a good word. Embrace where you're at in this season. Embrace your voice in this season. Embrace learning in this season. Embrace growing in this season. Listening in this season. There's so much I want to cover still. We don't have a ton of time. But I want to speak to a lot of white folks today who your melanin's near the same as mine, who get really inflamed with some terminology that's thrown around, and I just want to explain it. Because when somebody that's black throws it around, or somebody that's Hispanic gets thrown around, people put their defenses up. And because they're both terms that kind of trigger people, just as everybody else has got their triggers, and it's white privilege and white fragility. I want to explain those for just a minute, because those are triggers that, when I play ball, if somebody said, you're soft, oh, you better not call me soft. If that's an athletic thing, if somebody calls them soft, it is a trigger. You don't call somebody soft on the football field or on the basketball. That's fighting words. And so white fragility, really what it is, and honestly, when you get triggered, it proves what it is. it's basically saying that, like, I play guitar and my fingers they get calluses when I play a lot. And so people that first start playing and they hurt and they can only play for like 2 seconds. And they're like, I can't do it, my fingers, I quit. I'm like, that's because your fingers are a little bit fragile. They haven't built up calluses. They haven't learned to deal with the pain that you've got to deal with to play guitar. Well, white fragility is you don't have enough calluses. You don't know how to sit in the pain of a conversation to feel what someone else has felt and what they've lived through, and to feel the uncomfortability that you actually said that one time. That you were actually a part of that in some way. That's white fragility. And it usually comes out with deflecting the conversation, by changing the subject, by whatever. And white fragility is not saying you're a racist. It's saying you've been in a bubble. You haven't practiced this enough. You haven't tried to play that. You haven't pushed through the pain to have some conversations, because that fragility, you're not fragile after a while. You can have the conversation and not take offense to everything, whatever white person has done to you. I don't have to take offense to all of that. I need to learn and I need to listen and make sure I'm not doing some of the same things right now. You know what I mean? And so that's white fragility. I hope that helps somebody process that a little bit from a white guy's voice today. And the second one is white privilege. And I think white people take offense to this as well, because not every white person's privileged in the way they think of that. Yeah, in terms of wealth. And they've had to work hard for what they get, right? White privilege is not saying you haven't had to work hard, you haven't had to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all those things. That's not what it's saying. White privilege it is saying you don't even realize that you're 2 steps ahead in the game. For instance, a dear friend of ours who comes and we baptized her here, she told us, she travels a lot, and she told us that, hey, anytime she is traveling to a new city, she looks it up on a website that lets her know whether it's a safe place for black people to go. Yeah. It's a thing. It is. And so as a white guy, I've never had to think about that. I've never had to think. And I don't think of that as a privilege. I mean, I've had to think, I went into Mexico and had to cross through the cartel, and I thought, I've been to a lot of dangerous places in the world. I've been stopped by all kinds of armies and militias around the world. I've had to think about that, but not in the sense of, hey, I'm going to go across state lines, or I'm going to go to this city down the road in my own country. Is this a safe? And I've never thought it's a safe place for a white person to go. And so you may not think of that as a white person as a privilege until you don't have it. And someone else looking at that says, no, that's a privilege. You don't have to think about that. And that there's not a website dedicated to, is it safe for white people to go there? That's a privilege. And you may not see it as that. It may not be the privilege of, living in the fancy house with the fancy car that you may be thinking. It's not saying anything about it. And that's just one example of about 100 examples in our society when it comes to when it comes to respect or showing yourself educated. Like you have to prove that, and then you get stereotyped if you talk in a way that doesn't fit into some narrative or like stereotype. And so that's what that's meaning. We could go a lot longer on those things, and I know I'm taking over a little bit, but I want to speak that and explain that to people who get triggered by those two statements. And hopefully that helps navigate what's meant by that, and you can just process that in your own life. Anything else you guys want to share? I definitely want to wrap us here soon. Anything else on your heart? I mean, I really want to turn the conversation to just like what's next. What can somebody do in this season to learn and to grow? Like, what would you encourage somebody? Hey, here's a good next step for you. Here's a good place to go. You mentioned a good book there. Sitting down, having a conversation. I don't know what else you guys would suggest as a good way. Hey, what's a good way to kind of grow in my understanding and in my ability to listen?
I don't know if I could speak for Jamie, but she's a very humble person, so I don't know if she's like ready to like share like so much on that. I'm not speaking for you, but I'm basically saying I want you to speak because you're very smart and you have so much insight. And considering where we're at in the nation right now, this would be different if it was a Hispanic person that was their life was taken, unfortunate, and that murdered. So I don't know. I kind of want I think I have my ideas for what I can teach my family, but I don't know. I feel like
What would you encourage people out there been in the bubble?
I would say, because I mean, technically, for me, growing up, I was in a different bubble.
Yeah,
But
different bubble.
the biggest thing for me is just having those uncomfortable conversations and actually not trying to pretty much add your opinion on. Listen, like actually listen. A wise man is a man who listens.
Yes.
So listen to others as they talk to you and try and understand where they're coming from when they say certain things and not automatically be on the defense as soon as someone says something. So like if I say, I'm not always angry, this is how I'm mad at this situation, don't just, sit there and be like, well, you shouldn't say certain things like that, or, automatically on the defense. If I'm explaining myself, let me explain myself to you and show you where I'm coming from, why I feel this way. And so like even with, me and my husband, that's what we do. We have those conversations where I explain to him, hey, growing up, this is how we dealt with this situation, or this, even with raising the kids, this is how we did. And then he explains, okay, this is what we did growing up. And you have to have that conversation in order to fully understand the big picture.
One another, yeah.
Yeah, and you have to just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the reason why I said that also because, like, sometimes we don't want to make ourselves feel so special, because a lot of times, we're really humble, and I know you're a humble person, so I appreciate you giving us insight on that. And I feel like from the only thing, what's next for Lee is to continue to ask God to expose what's inside of me. And that's because I know that the term Rome wasn't built overnight, is like a term. And I know that progress and change, just like I can't expect to be like 100% like lean and in shape overnight. That takes some time to work that. So I want to educate myself more on things around me that I might do, even if I'm not doing anything wrong, but I want God to make me a little bit uncomfortable, I think is where it comes from. You never grow if you don't push yourself that extra mile to run. And you never grow if you don't walk in somebody else's shoes. And that's why Jesus was the perfect example to me of somebody who was did the opposite. And I've asked a lot of my friends that I'm around, sometimes there's a time for me to speak, sometimes there's a time for me to listen. And I've learned that in this season that I remember saying a stereotypical thing a long time ago, and that was what God exposed to me. So I think it's a fine balance of giving yourself a little bit of grace
To grow,
and giving yourself a little bit of humility and letting God have his way in your life. And that's, I think, where we're all on the journey of, is just going there. So I guess that's kind of a broad explanation. I don't know. Is there anything else?
You want to add something there?
Do you guys, I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but there was this video online, and I saw it, it was probably like a year or two ago, and it was this teacher, he had all his students in the field, and then he had them all standing in line for getting to the money, and then he, asked basic questions, like if you grew up with both parents, if you didn't have to worry about where your next meal and all that, and like to see everyone just keep walking. And then so like, me and my husband, we did it like like a mental note. And then I'm like, okay, I'm still standing here. I'm still standing here. And he's like trucking along. And I think that was a good example of one of those things where we need to pay attention and not just say, oh, well, they just, their parents just ruined their lives, or they just didn't try and do better. It's certain situations you can't help. It's out of your reach. And so by having this conversation, by having the conversations that other churches and other people are having around the world right
Yeah.
now. This is a time for us all to just grow and learn from our parents and, other, parents' past mistakes, and just grow from what
Yeah.
they did and just make it a better place
Yeah.
for our kids.
We live in a beautiful city.
Yeah.
I'm not from here, but I love this city. I really do. It's a diverse city. I mean, it's 50% white and it's 50% people of color. It's 30% black. It's 10% Hispanic, 5% Asian. It's 3% mixed race. Your kids are in the 3%, and 2% of the other. Man, I want our church to look like that. I want our church to look like our city. I think it honors God most when we look most like heaven, most like our city. And I'll tell you just a couple things I've been reading that I've just been meditating on. I read through the book of Esther. It's a powerful book to read through, just on systemic racism, and how to stand in that gap and how to fight, and where she fell short, and where and how to stay strong in that too. A powerful book on that. I'm reading through the minor prophets in the Old Testament, because there was a lot of crazy stuff going on that was not okay, and the prophets are kind of speaking up for it. And they're a bold example in this season. And I've just been meditating on Micah 6:8. What does God ask of us? What does he require of us? To love justice, not like justice, to love justice, to act, or to act mercifully, to love justice, to act mercifully, and to walk humbly. I mean, what you were just saying, love justice, act mercifully, live that out, and then walk humbly. I think that's just a text for us to meditate on, right along with James 1:19. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. I hope some of that helps us. Hope this conversation has helped us. I'm thankful for it. Y'all had me tearing up, and we did good. We did good. And so I'm thankful to you guys. I really am. I'm thankful that the friends you are to us and our family, and just so blessed by you guys in so many ways. And thank you for having the conversation, and thank you guys for hanging. If you've watched the whole thing, thank you for being a part. Let's continue the conversation offline. Let's continue the conversation among friends, among people who are different from us. Let's be together around the dinner table. I think when our dinner tables look more and more diverse, our church is going to be more diverse, and those calluses are going to get built up, and we're going to become stronger together. We're going to make more beautiful music through just the diversity, the harmony that comes together when God's church is unified. Let me pray for us to close. God, thank you so much for just the beautiful diversity of your kingdom. Thank you, God, that it's not a mirror, that the kingdom is not a mirror, but the kingdom is a beautiful, magnificent spectrum that we as Americans only get a glimpse of. God, our upbringing has only given us just a tiny little glimmer of how beautiful and diverse your glory is shining through all kinds of different cultures around the globe. And right here in our city, God, would you just help us to love justice, to fight for justice, to act mercifully to one another when we're trying to figure out the right words, when we're trying to work through our anxiety and our anger and our frustration. Would you give us mercy with one another? And God, would you help us to walk humbly, that we can listen and we can hear each other, we can learn and grow. And God, most of all, we're learning and growing from you, hearing what you are speaking into our lives, God. So we say together, just search us, oh God, know us, find if there's any way in us, God, that's crooked, that's wayward, and draw us back to the feet of Jesus, to be more like him. And we love you today in Jesus' name. Amen. Love you guys. Thank y'all so much.